how the Obama administration justified the drone strike against al-Awlaki, who was an American citizen. You were able to read through the Freedom of Information Act the legal memo justifying that drone strike. Was that document that you got through the Freedom of Information Act?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I filed a Freedom of Information request in 2010 when we first heard that al-Awlaki had been put on the kill list. And I asked for all legal opinions from the Justice Department about targeted killing, not just about Americans, but in general. And it was denied. We went to court. The New York Times represented me, and we joined in with a parallel claim from the ACLU. And after 4 years of fighting in court, the Obama administration was ordered by a judge to an appellate court to turn over the two opinions. So we got redacted versions of two opinions about why the government felt that it was legal and constitutional to kill an American citizen in this circumstance.
Can you summarize what you learned?
Well, generally speaking, it's got a lot of different elements, but you know the kind of core argument is that Anwar al-Awlaki was posing a continuing imminent threat to Americans, to the United States, and that while he was entitled as an American citizen to due process under law before they deprived him of life or liberty, which is what the Constitution says, that you could give due process by simply an internal executive branch secret examination of the evidence against him. Normally, we think of due process as your day in court. You know, your right to be to confront your accusers, to be charged criminally, to be judged by a jury of your peers, and so on. But what the Justice Department, Obama's Justice Department, decided was that there was adequate due process for the CIA and other agencies to, you know, sort of assess what al-Awlaki had done, to judge him to be an imminent threat, and that would justify his killing.
Why was al-Awlaki added to the Obama administration's kill list?
Well, if you talk to administration officials, they say it was because he had sort of turned the corner from being just a propagandist, a very effective propagandist for Al-Qaeda, to being an active plotter of violent attacks against the U.S. And the centerpiece of their evidence is the so-called underwear bomber Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib, 23-year-old Nigerian who tried to blow up the plane over Detroit on Christmas Day in 2009. There is strong evidence, including Abdul Muttalib's testimony, that Anwar al-Awlaki, essentially helped recruit him for that mission, coached him for that mission, told him specifically to wait until he was over U.S. soil before he blew up the plane. So that was the triggering mechanism that began the legal process that put al-Awlaki on the kill list.
And he also seemed to have a connection, correct me if I'm wrong here, to the so-called, was it the printer bombs?
Yeah, printer bombs.
Yeah, where there were bombs like embedded in printers on cargo planes. And a Saudi tip prevented that plot from coming off successfully, but it came awfully close.
That's right. And in al-Awlaki's magazine, Inspire magazine, there was an essay from a person called the head of foreign operations, and from the style and from certain hints in that essay, it very much looks like al-Awlaki was taking credit for the attack and sort of gloating, even though the bombs didn't go off, bragging about the disruption to the air cargo system that had been caused.
So the drone strike that takes out al-Awlaki is considered, a big success in the Obama administration, but 2 weeks later, there's another drone strike that's supposed to take out an al-Qaeda leader, but that al-Qaeda leader isn't at the site of the drone strike that day. But two people who were there and who were killed by the drone strike was Aleki's 16-year-old son and the son's cousin. You spoke to Aleki's family. You spoke to his father and to his uncle, to his brother. Was there any evidence that the son was considering joining Al Qaeda or was sympathetic to the cause? I mean, why was he in the place that was targeted for a drone strike, which I assume was a place that had that was an Al Qaeda location?
It's a complicated story, and it's impossible to be certain about this. But it's certainly clear that Abdurrahman had been an ordinary kid, by all accounts, a very sweet kid, in Sana'a. No connections to terrorism, no connections to radicalism. But I talked to a Yemeni journalist who is post-Al-Qaeda, and there were also Al-Qaeda statements to the effect that after he learned of his father's death, that the U.S. had killed Anwar al-Awlaki in a drone strike, that the 16-year-old son, Abdurrahman, essentially said, well, that's it, I'm joining the jihad. And that he was with some characters who were, associated with Al-Qaeda, certainly not at a high level, and they did not include the person who the U.S. was targeting. But at the time, they were hit by the drone strike. The family's version is that it was just a bunch of friends, and nobody had any connection to Al-Qaeda. But there is certainly some circumstantial evidence that the 16-year-old, not surprisingly, in the kind of tribal culture in this area, and of course he'd been asking for help finding his father, that meant making contact with Al-Qaeda. A son in a situation like that would be under heavy pressure to vow to avenge his father's death. And, there are certainly credible accounts that is what had happened. But that was his first, he essentially, if he had joined Al-Qaeda, he had just joined Al-Qaeda. He had none of that in his history. And the U.S. had absolutely no intention, I'm told, of targeting him, and no idea that he was there.
My guest is Scott Shane. His new book about Anwar al-Awlaki is called Objective Troy, A Terrorist, a President, and the Rise of the Drone. We'll talk more after a break. This is Fresh Air.
WNYC is supported by Universal Pictures, presenting Steve Jobs, the new film from the screenwriter of The Social Network and the director of Slumdog Millionaire, in select theaters October 9th, everywhere October 16th. Live Nation, presenting Emmylou Harris and Rodney Crowell, September 15th at 8 p.m. at the Beacon Theater. Tickets on sale at Ticketmaster.com.
Coming up at 3 on WNYC, John Hockenberry and The Takeaway on 93.9 FM and on AMA 20, It's the World.
Support for NPR comes from NPR member stations and from Subaru, automotive partner of the National Park Service Centennial. Subaru encourages people to explore America's treasures and discover a national park adventure at findyourpark.com. Love, it's what makes a Subaru a Subaru. And from America's Natural Gas. Learn how Denver International Airport is committed to lowering emissions by heating its terminal and fueling hundreds of vehicles with natural gas at thinkaboutit.org.
This is Fresh Air. Let's get back to my interview with Scott Shane, author of a new book about Anwar al-Awlaki, the American-born imam who was killed by an American drone strike in Yemen 4 years ago. But his videos and CDs continue to inspire people to join the jihad. So I want to get back to a turning point in al-Awlaki's life, which is when the FBI gets onto his visits with prostitutes, and then they start following him. They start recording what sex acts he does and everything. It is, I think, very revealing and fascinating that the 9/11 hijackers, al-Awlaki, they're all spending time either at strip clubs or with prostitutes, and yet their cause is all about purity and sexual purity. And there's such a very deep level of not only hypocrisy, but probably repression that comes into play here, like sexual repression.
Yeah,
that manifests itself as like, well, I can't have sex in in a legit way, so I'll go to prostitutes.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a subject that's worthy of study because it's a pattern that you see again and again. And I mean, I've noticed in putting together this book and sort of looking at the timeline that Anwar al-Awlaki, when he lived outside Washington, did a video for the Washington Post about Ramadan, explaining the holy month of Ramadan. It's a beautiful thing. You can still find it on YouTube, of course. And he says, among other things, that that Muslims abstain from sex from sunrise to sunset during the month of Ramadan. And so it was interesting to find him going off to visit a prostitute at 2:30 in the afternoon during the month of Ramadan. He's not around to ask about it, but, and I don't want to play psychiatrist, but you do wonder whether part of his ultimate hatred for America was sort of what the American culture had seduced him into, how he had violated his own principles repeatedly, and whether he sort of blamed American culture for that. That's at least one way of looking at, one of his motivations, perhaps.
We haven't spoken much about Obama during this interview, but, part of your book is about how Obama went from, vowing to create better relations with Muslim countries and to end or downscale the wars that were started by the previous administration. But, this situation changes, and he ends up, using more drone strikes than President Bush did, including the drone strike, of course, that killed Anwar al-Awlaki and that killed his al-Awlaki's son. Have you had a chance to talk directly with President Obama about his use of drone strikes and about what it's like for him when people who were not targeted are killed, people such as Anwar al-Awlaki's son?
I have not had an opportunity to talk to President Obama. I asked the White House for an interview, and it was turned down, not surprisingly, I think, on this topic. But President Obama has actually spoken a good bit about drones, and particularly in a 2013 speech that was devoted to this. Sort of the heart of the speech is about al-Awlaki. Unfortunately, the president mentions other American citizens having been killed, but did not address then and has not addressed publicly what American officials consider to be a tragic mistake in killing the 16-year-old son. One thing, Obama ran against the big wars that George W. Bush had started, the big war in Afghanistan and the big war in Iraq, which he saw as, counterproductive in many different ways. And, he arrived wanting to pull out of both wars. And, for the most part, he's done that. But he also recognized that the terrorist threat was real, and that a successful terrorist threat against the United States had the possibility of upending his presidency and, dominating everything that he was trying to do. So he actually saw drones, even before he became president, as potentially the right answer to this problem. He often told his aides, let's kill the people who are trying to kill us. In other words, let's not kill, tens or hundreds of thousands of civilians with a giant ground war that lasts for 10 years and, probably produces as many radicals as it kills. Let's use the drone to precisely kill the small number of terrorists who really represent a threat to the United States. That is a very, seductive notion, and I think he saw it as as really the answer to balancing the need to keep America safe with his desire to get out of these big wars and not to get into another one.
So after al-Awlaki was killed by the drone strike, he was seen as a martyr. How has his martyrdom affected the power and the reach of his message?
Well, if you go on YouTube today and put his name into the search engine, you come up with tens of thousands of videos, and many of them are actually tributes to him as a martyr. You know, that it'll say Sheikh Anwar al-Awlaki, martyr. And there are really quite impressive collections that mix his lectures and sermons from different parts of his life to sort of adoring pictures of him. And it's very clear that his status as a martyr has given his message, including the message that it's the obligation of every Muslim to attack America, even greater authority. In other words, the drone strike that killed him did not silence him. He's all over the internet now, putting out the same message, and that message is being heard. In case after case, you find that Awlaki was a crucial influence behind young Muslims in America, in Britain, in Canada, and in the rest of Europe sometimes, in convincing people that violent jihad is their duty as Muslims. You find his influence in the years since his death in 2011, not only in dozens of small cases where the plots actually never came to fruition, but you find his influence powerfully in the Boston Marathon bombing, where the Tsarnaev brothers got both their bomb-making instructions and their ideology from Anwar al-Awlaki. And then in 2015, the Charlie Hebdo shootings in Paris, at the satirical newspaper in Paris, those guys were French. Their first language was not English, but they were big fans of Awlaki, and one of the brothers had actually gone to Yemen and met Awlaki and claimed, before he was shot by police, that Awlaki had financed their mission. So some of the biggest and most devastating terrorist plots in the West since Awlaki was killed very much were a reflection of his influence.
Has ISIS been using Awlaki's videos as recruiting tools?
You know, ISIS, while it's got an extremely sophisticated media operation and social media operation, has not been able to replace Awlaki. It doesn't have any English-speaking, jihadist voice with anything like Awlaki's power. So interestingly, they have drawn on Awlaki, and there's a very slick English language recruiting video that uses Awlaki's voice and picture sort of as the centerpiece. So his influence is very much a part of the Islamic State's recruiting success.
I want to ask you a reporting question. You write that your research for this book about Awlaki and the drone strike that killed him has underscored just how far the federal government has drifted from the openness that is the lifeblood of democracy, and that President Obama promised in 2009 when he came to the White House. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the chilling effect of I think we're up to 8 prosecutions under the Obama administration of current or former government employees for leaking classified information to the press. You find that people, understandably, are very worried about even getting into a sensitive area like drone strikes. And the tone is set from the top. It's perplexing to me that it required a 4-year fight in court to get the legal opinions that the government was using to justify killing an American in a drone strike. We were not seeking the sensitive intelligence that showed his connections to Al-Qaeda. We were simply asking for the government's legal arguments, and that was denied, and only because we won in court did we get a glimpse of what the government's official reasoning was.
Scott Shane, thank you so much for your reporting and for this interview.
You're very welcome.
Scott Shane is a national security correspondent for the New York Times and author of the new book, Objective Troy. Coming up, Kevin Whitehead reviews a new album by composer and drummer Harris Eisenstadt. This is Fresh Air.
WNYC support comes from Geico, celebrating over 75 years of providing auto insurance for drivers across America. More information on auto insurance available at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO. The Young Vic production of Arthur Miller's A View from the Bridge, presented on Broadway by Lincoln Center Theater in a 17-week engagement. Previews begin October 21st. Tickets and more information at aviewfromthebridgebroadway.com. WNYC is a media partner of the 2015 Food Network New York City Wine and Food Festival, October 15th through 18th. More than 100 events benefiting hunger relief. Tickets on sale now at nycwff.org.
You're listening to Fresh Air with Terry Gross on WNYC. Coming up next, it's The Takeaway on 93.9 FM and on AM 820, it's The World.
This is Fresh Air. Jazz drummer and composer Harris Eisenstadt is originally from Toronto but now lives in Brooklyn. 8 years ago, he put together a quintet called Canada Day. 4 of the original members are still around for their 4th album. Jazz critic Kevin Whitehead says it shows the wisdom of sticking together.
Eisenstadt's long-running quintet, whose new album, Canada Day 4, makes a case for working bands. Some great jazz records are made by one-shot combinations, taking their first crack at tricky material. But that doesn't always work. Sometimes you just hear the musicians struggling, like they're squinting at the sheet music. Harris Eisenstadt's compositions aren't so difficult, but they have a lot of sudden reversals and abrupt changes of mood that are quite effective if the players know all the turns in the road. His band can swing, but he may make you wait for it.